All right, so we're about to make a lid with a flange. Which part do you make first? I'm gonna have to throw two things, right? A body, right, which would be like this part here, right, the body, and then the lid, right, that will fit on top. Well, always make the one that's the hardest to make, or the thing with the most clay, because that's the harder one, right? So since this body is gonna have more clay, right, that's the thing I make first. The lid's gonna have a lot less clay, so I make that second. So what you want to do is you want to start off with a wedge piece of clay, wedge one piece of clay total, so it's all the same. Wedge it up really good, and then just tear off a chunk. That will be my lid later. Maybe I need a little bit more. That makes sense? Why is that? Well, because they're starting with exactly the same piece of clay, hopefully one of the things that mess people up is their two pieces of clay will shrink differently. One will shrink more than the other as it's getting the bone dry or whatever. Then you run into problems because then they don't fit anymore. So I set that piece aside, and this is the piece that I'm going to make my body of my pot with. And I'm just feeling it. For what I want to make, it's probably too much, so I'm just going to tear off another chunk right there. Here we go. So I'm just going to make a little round pot that will take a lid on it. So this is really well wedged up. I slap it down. I'm throwing on a bat. I always throw these on a bat, and I never lift them off. So this bat is going to be the bat it's going to be with. Just like anything, I just go through a regular centering process. No big deal, right? Super well wedged. I went through extra trouble to make sure it was wedged up more than a little bit normal. I'm using pretty good clay, so I'm trying not to use clay that I've used before. Like, try to get your new good clay for this, right? It seems like I've been telling you a lot, use your new good clay lately. That's because we're trying out harder stuff, right? So if you're just making bowls and cups and stuff, you can kind of get away with a few like clay that's not perfectly wedged or whatever, but any imperfection in your clay, right? If you lose one of these pieces, the lid or the body, you kind of lose two things, right? Then if you lose your body, then you have this lid that doesn't fit anything, or vice versa. So you want to use the best clay that you have so that you lower the chance of losing something. So here it's centered, right? And I'm just going to throw a cylinder, then I'm going to shape it a little bit. So here I'm going down like that, woohoo, going down, and then I'm going to open. Everything's like normal, right? I didn't get a needle tool, so we'll just have to fake it with this guy. Oh, it's about right. Ooh, that made a huge dent. Hopefully that doesn't cost me later. Can I borrow someone's needle tool? Is there any up there? I thought that we were out.
What do you need?
A needle tool. That's okay. I'll live. I'll live. All right, so here we're gonna flatten out the bottom because I'm gonna try to throw a nice big cylinder. What I want though for this cylinder is I don't wanna make it as thin as possible because I need that, you know, when you make things, everybody notice that when they make things really thin, they get out of round, right? Because it starts losing its strength. The goal of this is to make something round because that's the only way, the best way I know to make something that fits really well. That makes sense? So the rounder, the better, right? If it's oval or something, if it just starts going oval on me, then that's not good because it's really difficult for me to make an oval lid that will fit really well. And then if it's really oval, then it only will really fit one way, right? Or maybe two ways at 180 degrees. But if it fits, I'm able to keep this really round, right? I can make it so that the lid fits any way I want if I make a round lid. Making the lid round is really easy. So what I'm really trying to do is not make it super thin, especially at the top here. You have to take it easy, right? Because that's where the strength and what holds it round is going to come from, right? We all want to make this super tall cylinder. We all want to use the clay up like crazy, right? But at the end, we want to take it easy with this part because it's better to have a good fitting lid. So you see, I'm really taking it easy as I come up. We want a good, strong cylinder, right? That's most important. That's round. So maybe I think I get one more raise. I'll get a little bit more height out of this, right? That makes sense. And here we go. Upsy daisy. right? Oh, I might have made it too thin down there. I pushed a little bit hard. I'm gonna have to take it easy as I come up here. There we go. So there we go. So I have a lot of cylinder. So I'm not thinning out this. I'm leaving some strength up here. I'm going to come down on the inside now and clean out all that water on the inside first, right? Because I do the same process that I would normally do with any cylinder that I have right before I shape it. I'm coming in here and cleaning out all that water. Then I'm going to come back here and use a rib on the inside, use a rib on the outside to scrape it clean. Oop, this rib is not very good. We'll do it this way. I grabbed on the bottom. There we go. Right, scraping that clean. We all know how to do this, right? I'm trying to make sure that it's round and true. So you see how round it is and how true it's not wavering. If this cylinder was already going astray, like it was already like wobbly and all over, I would just scrap the whole thing about making this into a lidded pot. I would just make it into something else, like cut base, whatever, and then I would wait. Like if the cylinder was already kind of out of whack a little bit, I would just say this one doesn't get to be that one, right? That makes sense? That I would just let it go. And because for me to battle it and make it back to round or whatever is very difficult. So you see, that's a nice solid cylinder. Now I could just go ahead and call it quits and like, that's it, right? But it's so straight, it's no fun, right? So let's add some body to it. Right, so from the inside, we always got to be careful when we're doing this. Why? When we're stretching, things do have a tendency to go out of round when we're stretching, right, and moving clay. So we got to be careful. But for me, I've left some thickness here, right, so that I have the ability. Maybe I'm hoping to shape it a little bit without messing it up. So here we go. Use this part of the rib here and push it out from the inside. Right, like that. I'm going to push it down. Be careful, like that, all the way down to there. That's already looking good. That's already looking better. It gives it some more dimension, right? I'm just trying out different things. Now, I'm not going to really go crazy with this. Why? Because we're going to make a teapot next class or next week as part of the lid demo series. Right, so you see that how it's starting to shape now. That's like feeling like okay enough to me as far as we're in the neighborhood. But now I have to think about how do I really get the shape that I want, right? Whoa, how do I really get the shape that I want out of this? So what am I looking at here? I'm looking that this is a little bit weak, the form. I'd love it if this was compared to here. Like this bottom is looking full enough for me, but up here it kind of gets kind of weak and flat. So I'm just going to use this part of this rib and push up here just to give that more oomph. Right there, you see that? More oomphiness. More oomphiness. More, a little bit more oomphiness. Oh, I think I got there. You see that how, for me, all of a sudden it just kind of got to its oomphiness. Now, we have to also, give me, I know, I can taste the crunchiness. All right, so not only is this, so let's use this one as an example, right? So we have this guy as an example. If it looks good without a lid, maybe you haven't made the right form, right? Because it has to, this other thing has to land on top, right? And it's going to give it extra height, right? And there's this kind of flange. I want this, for me, I want this flange, this part hanging over, right? So you see how it gives it changes the form a little bit. So now I need to start thinking about that as I'm doing this. So now, so how do I think about that? I got to think about this, right? So now when I do that, for me, the proportion, right? You see, I'm just trying to imagine it in my brain. Proportionally, it looks too tall. Now, I think without that, it proportionally height the width, for me, it seems better, right? So maybe what I'm going to do is belly this out more, right? To change the proportions, the height, the width, once I add my thing. That makes sense to everybody? So I have to think about that in the end. So I'm going to push out here more and just belly it out more. Even though I was excited about how it looked in general, right? I know that if I don't belly it out more now, I will end up with something that is too tall proportionately. So let's look at that. Ooh, it's looking better, right? To me, it's looking better, maybe even a little bit more. So here you can see that this piece here does this little, it does a little bit of turn back in. You see how it's scooping back out this way some. I have to think about, do I really want that? I think I don't, but I can push it in, right? I can push this in. Let's try it. Let's just do it. So I'm pushing it in a little, right? Rather than bellying this out, I can keep on bellying this out, right? Or I can push this in. Now, what are the considerations here? By pushing it in, if it's something that you need to reach your hand inside for, right? After it shrinks and dries, I may not be able to do that anymore. Right? So if it's something like where you store coffee beans or you need a little scoop, right, that's floating around in there, that you need to get the scoop out, scoop the stuff out, right? There's a danger that it won't be big enough for that anymore, for me, right? Does that make sense? So maybe, John Hasegawa, we need to actually widen that back out a little. Oh, no problem now, right? But now that changed the form, so I need to maybe belly this section out. Right, that makes sense. So how you're going to use it later makes a difference. If it's something with a long handle that you're scooping in there, right, that will work. But then I always run into the question, like, where do you put the long handled scoop later, right? I like it when you just get to leave it behind inside because you always know where it is, right? John Hasegawa does not like searching around the kitchen for things. There we go. So now let's look. Does that seem okay? I think that seems okay, right? We're getting into the neighborhood of okayness, right? With that extra height and everything. So, all right. So now the trick is, hopefully, let's look at that we want that to be dead round, right? It's looking pretty dead round. And then we also want to make sure it's a same height as it's going around. So it looks like both of those things, right? So we're just going to wet this off. Like that, really smooth it. As long as this is roundish, right? You see, I'm just kind of taking some time rounding that over. This is good enough. If you need to cut it off with your needle tool, you can, right? So that, you see how it's pretty good. So I'm just gonna go with it. And then now what are we gonna do? We are going to find the best angle with the camera, and then we're gonna gently undercut this. Oh, and just like faces and stuff, I know when you look at this in the profile, I know that starting about here and down, I'm going to remove clay, right? So you see, I know that that's too blobby out. So I'm going to trim some of that in. If it already looks good, which I'm actually a little bit worried that maybe I should, no, it looks a little bit blobby out, right? So I know that when I trim this area back in a little bit, it'll look better. Right? Does that make sense? So this shouldn't look out too much, and we'll trim it next class. So there we go. On. All right. So then we wire it with a wire tool, which I had, but it left. All right. So we'll wire. Oh, good. If someone can grab me a wire. I think it fell off the front of the wheel. Yeah. So here, wire it off. So now, the trick is with this is always keep it round, right? So I'm going to keep it on the bat. Right? Why? Because every time, if I lift this guy off the bat, there's a chance that I could unround it. So there are plenty of people that make it on the bat or make it and they lift it off and do all this fancy stuff. I believe in keeping it on the bat, right? So it doesn't unround, right? And then you notice I'm going to keep it nearby. Ooh, why is that? Well, before I even take it off, before I really move it, I should test this. What do I mean? I should take a look and take some calipers. Now we have two types of calipers, these fancy ones and these not so fancy ones, right? So what do the fancy ones do? The fancy ones take two measurements at the same time. You see that? This distance here from inside to inside is the same distance from outside to outside. Ooh, isn't that awesome? So why is that important? I'll show you here. I'll measure with both of these. So inside to inside. So why am I measuring the inside? I should explain that to you. So I am measuring the inside dimension. Let's use this guy. I'm measuring, let's do from the side. I am measuring the inside dimensions here of this guy right there. You guys see that? I'm measuring that inside dimension where the lid is going to seat down. That's the critical measurement. You guys see that? right there. From that point to that point there is a critical measurement. And that measurement here, when you throw the lid, should come down and you should measure that distance there. You guys see that? These two sides are equal. This distance to that distance is equal from inside distance to inside distance. So that's why these ones are so good, because you can measure the inside here, right, like that, and then you can flip them around. When you make this, you measure the inside there. That's what makes these so magical. So I guess we're committed to using these. If you only have one, I'll show you how to do it with just one. We measure. I just cheat when I measure with just one. So instead of measuring this way, like that, like I did with the other one, I just cheat and I just measure the air gap or the inside surface inside, but measure this way. You guys see that, what I just did? So that's what I did for this one, is I measured from the air space. That makes sense from there. So I have the both measurements there. So now this guy goes away, but I keep it close by. What does that mean, John? I keep it right there. So you notice a lot of you guys have benches or your table is nearby. I keep this nearby, so when I'm throwing my lid, I'm kind of can reference back and forth visually, right? Because they have to work together or they look goofy. Right? It's like, you know, people when they wear hats, right? Some people, they just shouldn't wear certain kinds of hats. They just don't look good, right? So I always like those hats that those people wear a lot when they're driving convertibles. They kind of have that thing and they have that little bill. I can't wear them though, because I look really goofy. I can't wear I can't wear cowboy hats because I look kind of goofy. And so, but I can wear my other hat that I wear. I don't know. Yes, so it's my lack of confidence. Oh, so you're just giving me issues. Now I'm gonna have to think about this.
Yeah, years of therapy because you.
I know. I'm gonna have to regression. All right. So this is a little piece of clay, and I actually don't need this much clay, so I'll just cut some off. All right. So what am I gonna do? I'm just gonna force this baby down. Now it made me feel like I shouldn't have. So you see, I just centered a piece of clay like that. So how big or wide does it need to be? It needs to be at least the wide as this and actually bigger, right? So you see that it's that wide, it needs to be a little bigger. These sorts of things are super easy. And when you make this sort of lid, right now, this lid is being thrown this way, right? This direction. The part that's on the bottom is this part here. The part that's sticking up is going to be this part here. Okay, you'll see it in a second. So this thing needs to be about as wide as you want the lid ever to be. So this mound here needs to be this, at least that wide. You guys see that there? Because that's the part that's going to hang over the side here. Now I have my mound made. Here we go. Now I just open this up. Oh, I better remeasure. Oh, perfect, right? Because the thing is going to be there. That will be the overhang. I think I'm okay. Then we'll go up. I go down a little bit, and I go out, right? So I go down a little bit there, right? And then I don't have a measuring thing. So now as I go back, this is like making a little bowl, right? So this side's going to be slightly domed upwards. You guys see that, how it's like boop up? So when I throw, I'm going to raise up and go out, 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 out like this, right? So you see how my little tester, my little example goes up, 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 up a little bit, because that allows you, when you trim it, to trim a dome on it like that, right? So I like these dome ones. So as I go out, I'm going to raise slowly, raise slowly, raise slowly. You see how this little bit of clay is starting to pull up? You see that right there? That little wave of clay is starting to pull up. Normally we push that back down, right? We back down. This time, that's where my flange comes from, is that little bit of clay. We're purposely going to cultivate that clay as we go up. You see how as I raise up, that little bit gets taller and taller and taller. Oh, almost dropped everything, right? I almost spilled my water. It goes up. Now, every once in a while, I may have to come back here and kind of repress that back down a little bit, but not to get rid of it, right? And then I raise up, raise up, raise up, raise up, raise up. Oh, look at how beautiful that flange is going to be, right? You see that? Now I have to start thinking, You see how the flange just naturally happens based upon the way how you throw. Now we can bring this guy back and check it, checkamunga, right? You see, oh, we better go top down. You see that, ooh, we can even, let's go top down and bring this down a bunch, right? So now that, since we're getting so detail-y, oh, this is gonna be right in front of my face. That good? No, I did the wrong thing. And then I gotta bend that back into place. Oh yeah, so you can see that how that flange is. Let's measure this again. Stop my wheel, look. Okay, so I'm almost there. You see that? Let's go back and I'm gonna measure against my original guy over here, right? I'm gonna recheck, because sometimes just setting this down and picking it up, it gets a little bit closed and bigger and all that. You just gotta recheck every once in a while. So I'm almost there, so I'm gonna do it a little bit more. Let's do it a little. Now, I actually like going a little bit too far. You'll see here in a second, right? So let me go back and I'll check it again. Oh, see, I'm a little bit too far. Oh, let's go back top down, right? See, I'm a little bit too far. You see how it's like not, it's resting. Ooh, we better just get down close. It's just resting on the side. That is actually what I want. I want it to be a little bit too far because I actually want to push this back a little bit. Let me get my special. Let's get one of these that has a good, nice round. Oh, yes, perfect. Oh, I just got clay like all over my face. I can feel it. All right, so here we go. So I get one of these ribs that have this sharp corner. And then what I'm going to do is use that corner. Let's go from the side. I'm going to use that corner to kind of push this and make this a really clean edge. You see that, how beautiful and clean that is? Oh. So easy, right? Not too hard. And then I'll come back again and I'll check it again. Hopefully, we're right on the money, baby. So we're good. So this is, you see where that flange is right there. That's the flange. Now, a couple of things to note that we haven't talked about yet. When you make your flange, these things are getting all wet. They're going to warp, right? When you make your flange, you want to make sure, you see how this flange is. You see how it's narrower here and wider here? So I'm throwing it this way, right? It's narrower here, right? And then it gets wider as it goes down, right? So why is that? So that way when it seats in there, it'll find a good seat. Let's do this one. This one's a better example, right? If your flange is straight up and perfect, right? But you see how, because this flange is getting narrower as it goes down, right? When I land it, if I'm off center, it will self-center as it drops down. That makes sense? So then that flange, it's only this part of the flange up here that needs to be tight, right? The rest can be tapered in. If this was tight and straight up and down, like that, you would run into trouble. If the flange even warps a little bit, it could lock itself in there, like it could even splay outward. But by having this flange bend in a little, stop that from happening. Because if you make one that really fits really tightly, and it doesn't have that taper here going in, if that flange warps at all, and it ends up flaring outward at all, it could lock itself in there for forever, right? As long as you have this flaring in, you don't have to worry about what's going on up here, right? But for this example, I did this example where this one's flaring out. You could do that, flaring out, and you could try to match that angle on your flange. But we're not doing that today for this one. All right, so we're almost done, right? So I'm gonna take this part here, and I'm just gonna mop up all the water, which I probably should have did earlier, but we delayed, right? So here, I'm just gonna mop up all that water, and I'm gonna make sure this is nice and thin. Now, the failure rate of these as far as throwing is almost nil, right? Because I had enough clay, it doesn't flop, it doesn't collapse. If I screwed it up, I can just make another one, right? Just grab another blob of clay. Sometimes also people want this part going down. What I mean, like right here, I can put a little bit of downward pressure here to create like a little channel right here, a little dip right there for this part of the rim, right? Because that rim is rounded. I can create a corresponding round spot there. Not a big deal either way. And so what else am I going to do? That's it, right? So now the trick is for these to dry out together. I want these to be about the same dryness. Now, a lot of times, since this is less clay, it will dry out faster than that piece. So a lot of times what will happen is I gotta leave them out to dry, and then I'll probably have to wrap one or the other, right, before next class. That makes sense? So I want them both to be leather hard at the same wetness and dryness by next class, because if one is drier than the other, they won't fit very well, and then I'll do some work on them, and then when they all dry out, then they'll fit worse, right, sometimes. So if they're fitting good now, I want to keep them at the same dryness, right, when I trim. Yes. When it took it inward like this. So this is like, it's like this right now. You see that? It's going inward from this model, right? But then when it's a little bit tricky, because then when you look at this guy here, right, it's still inward, right? But then it's going to go on top like that. That makes sense? So this is sitting right now, this flange is sitting like this. And then what happens next time is I trim this round top on to the bottom. Right? Is that confusing? I trim the round top onto the bottom of this one. So this gets flipped over, and I trim that part. So this is sitting like this right now. It's just solid clay. And then you can see this outline I put on here, right? It's the futureness of the lid. Does that make sense? That's the futureness exists down here. Now, how can I kind of predict what's going on, right? How can this is one fault that John Hasegawa does all the time, is that I have about that much to trim off, right? You see that? That's how much dome I get to put on there. That makes sense? And because I gotta leave that thickness to be the part that you grab. If you want a taller dome, you gotta leave more clay thickness behind, right? So I tore off that one chunk. Maybe I should have left it if I wanted a taller dome, right? That makes sense. In general, I'm shooting more for a flatter dome look, but if you want a taller dome, you can kind of make the whole baby kind of turn upwards more, right? And as you go out and farther, sometimes that dome needs to travel further to get a good doming action, right? If this was a really wide piece, if I didn't put more, I'd have to put more verticalness to get the same kind of dome look, right? I don't know. It's my hand. Did I get it? Thank you. I just find a clean spot here now. Thank you. Any questions? So that's step one to making this sort of lid. Measure. It's not too hard. It's fun, right? Keep that round. Make this round. This is easier, right? If you mess up on the first one, just go. You don't have to worry. If you mess up on that guy over there, just scrap it, right? Don't even bother trying to make it into a lid. Just make a new one, right? Good? All right, awesome. Make some flange